Welcome everyone, Kostin here with a discussion about my least favorite campaigns in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Now, I considered how to do a video on this subject. I didn't just want to include the campaigns of the worst races, or campaigns that have no merit to them. I could have filled this list with Vampire Coast campaigns and I would have been done with the video in 2 minutes flat. Instead, I wanted to talk about campaigns that, on many levels, objective levels, the Legendary Lords are good. There can be fun found in them, but I personally just don't find them that great to actually play. I'm sure some people will agree with me. I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me on some of the choices, in particular one or two of them. But to get started, at number 5 is Malus Darkblade. I think this is one of the least popular Dark Elven campaigns, and Dark Elves do have a popularity issue, but they are a very functional race in general. There's some issues with the tiers of units, if you are talking about those, in terms of availability in a Dark Elf campaign. Sure, some units do require too high of a tier for their combat capability. Yes, like, dragons, black dragons should be a tier down. Actually, a lot of the units that are tier 5 should be one tier down in general in the game. But here's the problem with Malus Darkblade. He is an incredibly powerful Legendary Lord. He can have a dynamic starting position, especially if you keep control of Hag Grief. Or you can cheese this starting position by, picking up some lords, sending them to get close to capture these territories, then selling Hag Grief. That is something you can do, but this campaign is monotonous as all hell. And the reason I say that is because you are in the Northern Castways. That's great, except you're in the Northern Castways, and the Northern Castways are not an especially great position to start your campaign in if you know you have no challenger whatsoever. And the thing is, Malus Darkblade, as a Legendary Lord, and Dark Elves in general, are so really powerful in a campaign that he is just gonna obliterate every single person that does try and stand against them. So you do have that power. You can get a ridiculous level of growth benefit. You can get a ridiculous amount of money. You can get some dynamic objectives over here for Sarkhan's Whispers. And none of it is interesting from my point of view. What's also worse, kind of, is like the fact that you do want to keep Malekith alive and actually give him territory so you can benefit, from the gift of the Witch King, so you can get a higher ranked hero over here, but just not really a great dynamic of a campaign. I don't think it's ever been really that interesting of a campaign for a lot of people. Powerful Legendary Lord, absolutely. One-man Doomstack Legendary Lord if you're fully possessed, absolutely. But that just doesn't do really all that much for me. And here's my issue. The problem I have with a one-man army of a Doomstack is that means it's only really good in the individual battles with that army. Whereas I think the most interesting factions to play are factions where it can have either many multiple powerful armies or great campaign effects, which is not what Malus Darkblade does have, except being able to summon an endgame army very quickly in his campaign. That is admittedly a bit fun, I'm not gonna lie. That is admittedly a bit hilarious, even if you go bankrupt in a couple of turns, but being able to summon something like this, yeah, it's kind of fun. Not gonna lie. And this is a proper army. This is not like, oh, some summon random bullshit. No, this is an actual genuine army you can use every 50 turns. So realistically, you're only gonna use it once. If you could do something like this multiple times, that would be a lot more fun, but no, it's only once every 50 turns. Your campaign is over in 30, so once per campaign, and it's gonna bankrupt you regardless of when you use it, because it's 6.5k income on turn 1 that it costs. So yeah, and it's randomized units as well, so it's not like, oh, you're gonna get X number of units. No, it's gonna be all over the place in terms of what you get. If you can get like a bunch of black dragons, that's really awesome. Might be the only campaign where you actually use dragons in either High Elven or Dark Elven campaign, but yeah, just doesn't do anything for me. And number 4, it would have to be Grombrindal, the White Dwarf. There were always issues with Grombrindal because of where he's situated on the campaign map, but I think ever since the Dwarf rework, this particular campaign has gone down in terms of enjoyment for me personally by quite a bit. The reason is, if we look at Grombrindal, his faction effects aren't really that special or anything to talk about at all. Like weapon strength and fighting against elves when you're playing dwarves and dwarven power. Yes, there's good melee power, but the real power of dwarves is range units. So that's not especially great. His blue skill line is the best in the entire game by far. In fact, it's probably the only blue skill line that you always want to take if you're playing his campaign or if you confederate him as another Dwarf Legendary Lord, because recruit rank, recruit cost, campaign movement range, casualty replenishment, faction wide, and global recruitment capacity is freaking amazing. Then you add in Mountain Strider, and you can capture a lot of territory very quickly as Grombrindal. So that's great, but here's the problem. Ever since the Dwarf rework, he's kind of redundant. Before the Dwarf rework, he had the best and honestly in a lot of ways the only fun and playable Dwarf campaign in the game, because all others were miserable because of Dwarf issues. After the rework, Malachi, Forgrim, actually all the other dwarves have more interesting campaigns because they have a lot more choice and dynamic campaigns available to them. Yes, Belegar and Forik have substantial issues in their campaigns, don't get me started on that, but they do have choices to make in those campaigns in terms of diplomacy, in terms of territory they capture, in terms of how they decide to plan their campaigns. Whereas Grombrindal, it's always going to be the same thing for at least the first dozen or so turns. And if that's the case every single time you start a campaign, then the replayability of one particular campaign goes down the drain very, very quickly. It's an issue I have with a lot of campaigns. Think of Nakai, he has that issue. Kafane campaigns have that. But I'm mentioning this campaign because dwarves are an amazing race. They do have very dynamic campaigns. That's one of the things that makes them really fun to play. But not Grombrindal, because Grombrindal's objective is always going to be to deal with Malekith. And when you deal with Malekith, you're going to encounter Valkia, who you're almost always going to end up in a war with. So you're always dealing with the same things in a campaign. You might deal with them slightly differently, to be sure, but you're always going to be dealing with the same foes and the same types of units that they're going to recruit. Malekith is almost always going to have Dark Shards. Valkia is always going to have Warriors of Chaos. It's always going to be that same situation, and again, and again, and again, and again. And diplomacy is not really an option. It's not an option with Valkia because of reversion. It's not an option with Malekith because, well, Grombrindal wants to take his head. Simple as that. Actually, it's not just the campaign victory conditions. It's also the Whitebeard Oath Grudge. And unfinished, and the Snorri Whitebeard final grudge that you want to go for. So you're pushed very hard down a very specific path in this campaign. You might argue that it's the same thing with Malachi. I would strongly disagree with that assessment. The only thing you may have to want to do every single time with Malachi is defeat Front. That is it. But that's a very different affair that you can do in a couple of turns. And you don't even have to do it. That's the point. You don't have to fight the Skaven in a Malachi campaign. It's very beneficial if you do. But you do have choices. You do have consequences for those choices. Here, it's the same thing over and over and over again. And I think that's the reason I don't really enjoy this campaign. To be clear, I wish to stress this out. If you do play this campaign, it can be fun a couple of times because you can conquer half the freaking world much faster than all the other dwarves, maybe even combined. Because that kind of campaign movement range does count quite a bit. And the way Warhammer 3 is set up, being able to move fast from the very beginning of your campaign is very important because you create a cascading effect and you just get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. When dwarves were reworked, one of the campaigns I played a lot of, or one of the longest campaign I played with the dwarves, not a lot of, I didn't play it too many times, but one of the campaigns I played the longest was actually a Grombrindal campaign, and what was it, by turn 60, I had all of Wolfo and Nagron under my control, as well as confederations with the other legendary lords of the dwarves, so a lot of the Balans and dwarf territory under my control. Yeah, that's pretty freaking ridiculous. But the replayability factor just isn't there for me anymore. And so I wouldn't recommend Grombrindal. Besides, the benefits he has in terms of blue line, you can get that with guaranteed confederation with the dwarves. This isn't so much of a problem in other Dwarven campaigns, but it's kind of an issue when you're talking about Grombrindal campaign. The only issue in other Dwarven campaigns, in terms of less choices, you're almost always incentivized to confederate Grombrindal first because of the blue skill line he has. That's it. And then, but to be honest, the way Dwarf confederations are set up and the requirements of grudges is that once you start confederate one, you can easily get a second, third, and all that. So it's just worth saying that Belegar and Forik do have more dynamic campaigns than he does.
Draken.
At number 3 is Elspeth von Draken of the Empire. I know this is a very popular campaign for a lot of people because she does have Ikit Claw's lab, and that is a very popular mechanic. She doesn't have the nuclear weapons of Ikit Claw, though she does have army abilities available in her campaign. The thing about Elspeth that I do dislike is kind of similar to Grombrindal. You do have theoretically more choice than Grombrindal does, but you're always kind of incentivized. Let me just go beat up Vlad real quick, and then you can play the rest of the campaign. The thing is, once you do beat up Vlad, whatever sense of challenge, whatever decision-making, whatever dilemmas you have in this campaign disappear. Everything else is just pure fluff. All the special units that she gets over here for the Imperial Gunnery School, pure fluff, because the power that she has inherently is ridiculous. And that's kind of the problem. Having a powerful Legendary Lord can be great, but you need to have that Legendary Lord actually be forced to use it in situations where it matters. This is the reason why someone like Arbol is really fun to play, because yes, he is incredibly powerful, like, exceptionally powerful Legendary Lord, but he is forced to use that power to actually even access it. Whereas with Elspeth, you win the campaign, then you access that power, so it's kind of pointless, isn't it, really? I guess you could ignore Vlad for a certain duration and just go after, yes, Belegar or Aranessa and Ikit Claw to make things a bit more interesting, but all the same, you're not really going to be able to use all the wonderful units and all the wonderful power that you do have access for the Gunnery School until much later. I was never really a big fan of Elspeth with Throne's Decay. I much preferred what they did for Karl Franz and Gelt. I'm not joking on this. You can say that Gelt's campaign is also very one-dimensional, but here's the thing. Gelt at least has that dilemma. Do I stay in Cafe? Do I go out of Cafe? And how do you go out about it? You can go to war with Cafe. You can stay in Cafe and be their ally. You can go back to the Empire. And you also have variations on that because you can use certain things like sell certain territory so you maintain a presence in both the Empire and in Cafe, or close enough to Cafe. So there are choices and there are ways to handle that campaign that make it genuinely interesting. Whereas with Elspeth, you don't really have those kind of dynamic choices until later. And by that, the time later comes, it's a complete cakewalk. That's kind of my problem. Like, I feel Legendary Lords should be very interesting the moment you start playing them. Gelt can be interesting because you can decide how you're going to play that campaign, and how you're going to go around Cafe. It can be very one-dimensional, don't get me wrong, but you can also not be very one-dimensional, whereas with Elspeth, I just feel the exact opposite. It is always very one-dimensional. And don't even get me started with the sheer number of choices and campaign variations that Karl Franz has in his campaign over here, even though he starts right next to her. That's the silly aspect about Elspeth and Karl. You want a better campaign like Karl. He might not have the ridiculous armies, but he's actually got interesting mechanics to use from turn 1. That's kind of the difference over here between the two of them. At number 2, it would be Archaon the Ever-Chosen, or rather Archaon the Snoozefest campaign, as I would call it. Why do I call it the Snoozefest campaign? Because even on Legendary very hard, you just come over here, you take this element, you've won the campaign. The moment you've taken this element, GG, well played, campaign is over, you're never going to lose it. That is certainly an issue in all Warriors of Chaos campaigns, how safe their positions are, certainly in the case of Be'lakor. But here's the thing. Regardless of how safe the others are and how unlikely it is to lose a campaign as any of them, at least they have some interesting things to do in their campaigns. Azazel has the diplomatic vassalization that he does have available in his campaign. So does Sigvald, I might add. Be'lakor has access to all the demonic units and all types of gifts of chaos, whereas Archaon, he starts with an extra undivided gift and has to unlock all the other slots to get access to things that Be'lakor starts with at level 1. And oh yeah, you get another undivided gift, and you can get more souls than anyone else within the context of a long campaign, until you realize, because of the balancing on Legendary difficulty, that Be'lakor far surpasses you in that respect, because you can get more gifts, and you can start running with all types of gifts very, very quickly, and that means univariety, campaign benefits, etc., etc. You may play this entire campaign and only have to fight one single battle manually outside of the quest battles, and that's against Boris Ursus, if you don't even avoid that as a battle. And I'm not exaggerating, because you can avoid that as a battle as well. That is not really a great campaign dynamic, now is it? And that just some things that are worth saying on this subject. There are, of course, more. There's, of course, more to say regards to Archaon, but just the fact that it's a slow campaign that you have to spend, you want to unlock, say, one gift of Slaanesh, 21 turns. You want to unlock a gift of Nurgle, 21 turns. You want to unlock a gift of Khorne, 21 turns. You understand the point. Be'lakor starts with these. It is an issue not really in Sigvald's campaign and Kolek's campaign, to be sure, but in all other Warriors of Chaos campaigns, including Be'lakor, you do have more flexibility with that, be it the Monogod ones or the Undivided one. And yeah, Sigvald, has the Slaanesh upgrades already gotten or some of that, so he does actually end up having more variety available in his campaign than Archaon. Archaon is absolutely very powerful as a Legendary Lord. He's also as boring as watching paint dry. In fact, as I've said many times on many other subjects, watching paint dry might be more interesting than playing this campaign. It's a nothing campaign. It's a press button to win campaign. And look, I'm the kind of person who hates fighting a lot of pointless battles, to be sure, but at least some battles in a campaign have to be worth something. But they're not. In this campaign, so very few battles, or almost none at all, are worth something. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the vassalization benefit. And as Archaon, you're heavily encouraged to vassalize more factions because of the various benefits, the souls, diplomatic relations, and research rate benefit for each vassalized faction. So you're pushed to get as many vassals as you can, but that means your vassals are playing the campaign for you. And look, that's a problem N'Kari has once you vassalize all of Wolf 1, which you should if you're playing N'Kari, but at least N'Kari has to fight for it, and holy hell does N'Kari have to fight for it. Where with Archaon, you're just being given it for free. Like, you get two factions over here, the Tong and the Coal, that you can vassalize for pretty much free. Like, you take the Burning Monolith, you get the Tong, all that stuff resolved, right? So yeah, this campaign should be a lot more interesting than it currently is, and it's just a nothing campaign, unfortunately. Finally, at number 1, for me personally, it has to be Ikit Claw. Generally, when a faction is bad to play, and I do mean the really bad factions, not the ones on this list. The ones on this list, for all my personal issues, are playable. They're good Legendary Lords, that's why I put them on this list. They're Legendary Lords that are good, that have a lot of things going for them, but I just don't enjoy playing them. But I put Ikit Claw in number 1 because, typically speaking, with really bad Legendary Lords, you either have a race issue, so the race itself is bad, or you have a Lord issue, the Lord is bad, or a combination of the two more often than not. You can just look at Mazdamundi as an example. That is absolutely the case in that campaign. But Skaven are a great race. They're a really good race. They're as close to a balanced race as you can get in Warhammer 3. Strong, but not so ridiculously over the top that they just auto-resolve every battle in their campaign like Warriors of Chaos. Like, Archaon's problems are a lot of them are related to the Warriors of Chaos situation. But Ikit Claw, outside of the Skaven auto-resolve shenanigans, which, by the way, you can resolve with auto-resolve mods, but outside of those shenanigans, Skaven are a great race. So why is this campaign bad? Is it because of him? No, he's got nuclear weapons. He's got an awesome army roster. He's got awesome faction effects. He's got unit customization through the lab. In some ways, he's got it much better than Fraud, who has to customize each individual unit on a limited resource. That can be a bit annoying, but here's the thing. This campaign start just flat out sucks. Objectively sucks. And the reason I hate this campaign is because I can see how it can be great. In fact, I've seen it be great playing the Old World mod when you don't have this miserable starting position. The first problem is that you start with a shared enemy with Mogr, and if you don't race him to this enemy, he's going to raise everything to the ground except Tabaro and make it uninhabitable unless you deal with that. That is a frustration, and it should be stated that beastmen themselves can cause annoyances for every campaign that has to deal with them, but no one else has to share an enemy with a major beastman faction. Tarax doesn't share an enemy with anyone else. Khazrak doesn't share a starting enemy with anyone else. I mean, unless you count, like, Festus, but that's not really the case, because Festus is dealing with Hochland and maybe Oslo. You can deal with Midland if you want, but that's a choice. It's not the same situation at all. Malagor doesn't share an enemy with anyone else. Mogr shares an enemy with fricking Ikit Claw, and that is so freaking frustrating. Seriously, this campaign would be much better if there were 2 different factions over here, and like Mogr had to deal with like Northern Estalia and Ikit Claw had to deal with Southern Estalia. That would make Ikit Claw a far bigger threat on the campaign map than he ever is right now. Mind you, he can be a threat, but he's more of a nuisance than anything else. That Skaven Auto-Resolve does hurt him quite a bit under AI control. But still, just the starting enemy is an annoyance enough, but then you have this entire situation. Bretonnia is not a great portion of the campaign map. Estalia, Tylea, they're not great portions of the campaign map. And because so many people hate you as Skaven, you're going to end up in a grindy war of attrition. Every single time you play this campaign, you're going to end up in a war of Belegar. Whether or not it's a grindy war of attrition or not, that's up to you. But the solution to making this campaign to achieving power is always do the same freaking thing or some variants. Like, either you screw over RNS and take this element, and then you're screwing yourself over with Belegar, or you race Mogr to fight the difficult battle early on, which you can win, nukes and all, but you race Mogr to take Estalia quickly. But it's always the same kind of crappy start every single time you start a campaign, and by the time you sort this out, the campaign is effectively over, because you got freaking nukes. The campaign technically should be over by turn 1. Technically it is, but practically it's always the same frustration of a campaign early on. This is genuinely my least favorite Skaven campaign to actually play. He's arguably the best legendary lord of the Skaven by far. I mean, you could argue about Fraud's benefits. I personally think like having nukes is better than anything Fraud can bring to the table. But I'd rather play Tretch than play this campaign again in Immortal Empires. It is that bad. For me, personally. But keep in mind, I do play a lot of different campaigns. I do a lot of testing, all that. So for me, the frustration is I'm wasting my time always doing the same shit over and over again. That's why it is. If you're playing it a limited number of times, it can be fun, but multiple times, holy shit, is this campaign awful. Like, try playing this campaign 20 times and you'll start understanding exactly where I'm coming from, because yes, I have gone for that over 20 times. I think I've done that for every single campaign, to some extent or another. Maybe not quite 20 times. But that's the thing that really irritates me about Ikit Claw. I can see how he could have a really, really good campaign, but he doesn't, purely because of the terrain design around here in Skaven Blight. And that's pretty unique, because generally there's other campaigns that have terrain issues, to be sure, but those campaigns have other problems as well. Here, it's not a problem to race or legendary lord or anything like that. It's purely a terrain issue. I mean, you could say it's a diplomacy issue because people hate Skaven, but I don't really consider that an issue. I think that's just part of being Skaven. It's not like the others don't have to deal with that, and they don't suffer as much. Fraud had a pretty awful situation as well. He still does in a lot of ways, but Fraud doesn't have Lorem next to him. And Lorem is a particular nightmare to tackle because, yeah, it's uninhabitable, it's slow to navigate, you've got powerful range factions, and terrain doesn't really suit your army or roster. I find it weird that Ikit Claw controls Skaven Blight as well. It kind of makes sense to the lore, it kind of doesn't, you know. Tankwall should be in the game and he should control Skaven Blight, but that's another discussion. But yes, this entire terrain situation needs a freaking update. Costine signing out, and stay tuned for more. And I'm probably going to be lynched for this list, but this is just my personal opinion on these campaigns. I don't think these are the worst campaigns in the game. Far from it. I think there's much worse objective campaigns, but these are campaigns that I dislike the least. Because other campaigns that are bad, genuinely bad, I just don't care about them. These are campaigns of Legendary Lords that should be much better than they are, should be a lot more fun, and should be iconic characters like Archaon, but they aren't. Stay tuned for more.